The eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the whole earth, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. Last June, about 5 months ago, when I had the privilege of sharing my testimony, I mentioned that verse. It's been an important verse to me for a long time. And when I mentioned it, I mentioned that, I was taking it out of context. And it's true, I was. And so I thought, well, I'll study the chapter around it, and I'll read the context of it. And one of the things I found is that the context does not change what I consider a promise in that verse, that the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the whole earth, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. It doesn't change it a bit. Now, we're going to look at the context a little bit later, and also I found a lesson in this chapter for myself, and we're going to go over that too. I want to look at some examples of people in the Bible. These are just a few examples of those whose heart was completely his. And the first one I want to look at is in Daniel chapter 3, verse 16 to 18. And that's where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were being threatened with either they bow down to the king or they get thrown in the fiery furnace. And what they said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he doesn't, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Their hearts were completely given over to God. They were completely his. Another one where we can find is in Job, chapter 1, verse 21. Now, Job said this after he had lost everything he had. He had lost all of his kids. He had lost all of his property. He had lost everything. And his response, which showed that his heart completely belonged to the Lord, was, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. And then later on, Job said in verse 2, or chapter 2, verse 10, he said, in response to his wife, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? And all this Job did not sin with his lips, because his heart completely belonged to God. In chapter 13, verse 15, Job said, though he slay me, I will hope in him. It didn't matter to Job. His heart completely belonged to God. He's one of the examples. And there are a lot more. Another one is in Acts chapter 7, verse 60. And that's when Stephen was being stoned. And falling on his knees, he cried out with a loud voice, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. And after saying this, he fell asleep. His heart completely belonged to God. And, throughout the New Testament and the Old Testament, we can see examples of people whose heart completely belonged to God. Now, last week, at the end of the service, those of you who were here, you might remember that some discussion came up about how we grieve when we see people who become Christians or appear to become Christians, and yet they don't seem to live a Christian life. And they have the attitude that, well, I'm saved, and that's all there is. And we spoke of how that grieves us. And I thought about that quite a bit this week, and it reminded me of a discussion that I had with a friend. It was during the summer. He was a mentor to me when I was first saved. He mentored me, and he was a pastor, but I didn't even attend his church, but I'd go to his Bible study, and I've been in contact with him all these years, since 1971. And he's a retired pastor now, lives in Michigan. He pastored in Ontario for quite a while, and I've visited him there several times. But I've kept in touch with him, and I was discussing with him things about the Christian life on the phone. This was during the summer. And one of the things I mentioned is that in the Christian life, that just like we got saved, we didn't get saved because of something good we did. It was all the Lord that saved us. And I mentioned to him in Colossians chapter 2, verse 6 and 7, it says, "As you therefore have received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, having been firmly rooted and now being built up in him and established in your faith, just as you were instructed, and overflowing with gratitude." And he said, that's true, but he said, you got to be careful about telling that to people, because sometimes people are going to respond the way we discussed last week, how they get saved, and they feel that that's all there is. And I thought about that, and I thought about, well, what's the answer? And the thing that I see that I believe is at least part of the answer is in John chapter 7, verse 17, where it says, "If any man is willing to do his will, he shall know of the teaching, whether it is of God or whether I speak from myself." What I see there is that God responds to people according to their willingness, according to what they want. And if people really want to live the Christian life, then Colossians chapter 2, verses 6 and 7 clearly would apply to them. That as you received the Lord, so walk in him. And you'll continue to walk in him. You'll continue to grow if your heart is completely his, if that's what you want. But if that's not what you want, well, then nothing is going to happen. Contrast to this, the opposite of those who are willing to do his will, the contrast I see is in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, starting with verse 8. And it says, "And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth, and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. That is, the one whose coming is in accord with the activity of Satan and all power and signs and false wonders, and with all deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth so as to be saved. And for this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence, so that they might believe what is false, in order that they all may be judged who did not believe the truth but took pleasure in wickedness." Now this I see as the opposite of those who respond according to John 7:17, those who are willing to do his will, those who want God in their life, those who want their heart to be completely his. I see this as a contrast. That now I know we believe that this is referring to the tribulation, and I think it is, but I believe it's happening now too, that the people that don't want the truth, that don't have a love of the truth, that they're going to believe some pretty weird stuff, and we see it all the time. And I think that's the reason. It's because it's what they want. It's because of what their will is. Okay, now we'll go back to 2 Chronicles. We'll go back to 2 Chronicles chapter 16, and we'll look at the context of it. And here is where I see a lesson for myself. Now, this is about King Asa. And King Asa is a man who is considered one of the good kings, one of the few good kings that reigned. And starting with chapter 15 of 2 Chronicles, verse 8, it's now when Asa heard these words in the prophecy which Azariah, I can't pronounce it, the son of Oded, the prophet, spoke, he took courage and removed the abominable idols from the land of Judah and Benjamin, and from the cities which he had captured in the hill country of Ephraim. He then restored the altar of the Lord, which was in front of the porch of the Lord. So it was his desire to bring the people back to the Lord. And it reminded me of King Josiah, who was of the 5 kings that were reigning during Jeremiah's ministry. Josiah was the only good one of the bunch. His father was bad, his son was bad, but Josiah was a good king that brought the scriptures back to the country. It goes on, speaking of King Asa, and he gathered all Judah and Benjamin and those from Ephraim and Simon and resided with them, for many defected to him from Israel when they saw that the Lord his God was with him. So they assembled at Jerusalem in the 3rd month of the 15th year of Asa's reign. And they sacrificed to the Lord that day 700 oxen and 7,000 sheep from the spoil they had brought. And they entered into the covenant to seek the Lord God of their fathers with all their heart and soul. And whoever would not seek the Lord God of Israel should be put to death, whether small or great, man or woman. Moreover, they made an oath to the Lord with a loud voice, with shouting and trumpets and with horns. And all Judah rejoiced concerning the oath, for they had sworn with their whole heart and had sought him earnestly, and he let them find him. So the Lord gave them rest on every side. And he also removed Micaiah and the mother of King Asa from the position of queen mother, because she had made a horrid image as of Azariah, and Asa cut down her horrid image, crushed it, and burned it in the brook Kidron. But the high places were not removed from Israel. Nevertheless, Asa's heart was blameless all his days. He's a man whose heart was blameless all his days, and so we would say that his heart completely belonged to the Lord. And he brought into the house of God and dedicated things of his father and his own dedicated things, silver and gold and utensils. And this is important, and there was no more war under the 35th year of Asa's reign. In the 36th year of Asa's reign, Baasha, king of Israel, came up against Judah and fortified Ramah in order to prevent anyone from going out and coming in to Asa, king of Judah. Then Asa brought out silver and gold from the treasuries of the house of the Lord and the king's house, and sent them to Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, who lived in Damascus, saying, let there be a treaty between you and me, as between my father and your father. Behold, I have sent you silver and gold. Go break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so that he will withdraw from me. So Ben-Hadad listened to King Asa and sent the commanders of his armies against the cities of Israel. And then they conquered all of Dan, Abel-Maim, and all the store cities of Naphtali. And it came about when Baasha heard of it, he ceased fortifying Ramah and stopped his work. Then King Asa brought all Judah, and they carried away the stones of Ramah and its timber with which Baasha had been building, and with them fortified Geba and Mizpah. At the time, Hanani the seer came to Asa, king of Judah, and said to him, because you have relied on the king of Aram and have not relied on the Lord your God, therefore the army of the king of Aram has escaped out of your hand. Were not the Ethiopians and Lupim an immense army with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because you relied on the Lord, he delivered them out of your hand. What he's saying is that in the past, the Lord had taken care of him and had delivered him. But now King Asa was trying to do things on his own. And then the verse that I had quoted earlier, for the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the whole earth, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. Okay, that's what had been happening to King Asa. But then it goes on. You have acted foolishly in this. Indeed, from now on, you shall surely have wars. And so King Asa, in the earlier part of his life, his heart had completely belonged to the Lord. And it wasn't like David's sin, where he committed adultery and murder. But just the same, he had fallen from being one who was completely trusting in the Lord. And when I say that that I see this as a lesson to myself, well, when you're in your 40s, they say that's the old age of your youth. When you're in your 50s, they say that's the youth of your old age. Well, I'm past my 50s now. I'm getting farther toward the end of my life. This I see as a lesson for me, because even though I've been a Christian since I was 22, I don't want my Christian life now to go downhill. I don't want it to falter. And I want to be faithful to him until the end. That's why I see it as a lesson for myself. And that's what I saw in this. It goes on. Then Asa was angry with the seer and put him in prison, for he was enraged at him for this. And Asa oppressed some of the people at the same time. He didn't listen to what this man, this prophet, had told him. That was a message from God that he was going the wrong way. And now the acts of Asa from first to last, behold, they are written in the book of the kings, Judah and Israel. And in the 39th year of his reign, Asa became diseased in his feet. His disease was severe, yet even in this disease he did not seek the Lord, but the physicians. So Asa slept with his fathers, having died in the 41st year of his reign. And they buried him in his own tomb, which he had cut out for himself in the city of David. And they laid him in the resting place, which he had filled with spices of various kinds, blended by the perfumer's art. And they had made a very great fire for him. Now, hear what it says where he didn't seek the Lord but physicians. I don't believe that's telling us never to go to doctors. But I believe what it's telling us is that when we go to the doctor, to be trusting the Lord. To be trusting the Lord to be the one that's going to take care of us. I believe we're going to see King Asa when we get on the other side. I believe he's one of the saved ones. And yet, his life didn't end the way it could have. King Josiah was very similar. He was the only one considered a good king during the ministry of Jeremiah, and yet, in the end, he disobeyed God, and he ended up going into battle and losing his life. And so his life faltered at the end. That's why I see it as a lesson for me. And what it's telling me is that I need to be on guard. I need to watch out for things like this, and who knows what else. And I want my life and my death to glorify the Lord. I don't want it to slide at the end. If anything, I want it to be better than it was at the beginning. We need to be, like we look at sometimes the parable of the sower, and we think of that as referring to someone who's a new believer, that the cares of the world, the riches, those are things that pull them away. Well, that can still happen to us later in life, that the cares of this world and the riches can damage our Christian life. And so, what I want to be is watching myself and guarding myself, and I want to see to it that my Christian life doesn't falter. And the verse I forgot to write it down, the one where it says, "Search my heart, O God, and know my ways." I want to be asking God to search my heart and to show me things, to show me if I'm ever getting away from him, because I don't want to do that. Another thing that I think we need to do, we don't know what's facing us ahead. We hear of all sorts of things that might be coming, and a lot of times the thing that actually happens is something we never heard of, is something we weren't expecting. But what we need to be doing is now, I think, is praying for wisdom and courage, because we aren't going to have those things on our own. And Solomon prayed for wisdom, and God gave it to him. God gave David courage. And those are two things that I'm not going to have on my own. And so I often pray and ask God for wisdom and courage. I want wisdom to know what's right, to know what is the right thing to do. And I want the courage to do the right thing. That's my prayer. And there's some other things that I see, as we were mentioning about how we grieve over people we see that are not living a Christian life, that claim to have accepted Christ. And of course, we meet people that aren't saved too. When I lived in St. Louis Park, we went to a large Assembly of God church that we'd get a lot of visitors. And so we had the Evangelism Explosion program there, and about maybe 30 or 40 of us were trained in that, to how to use it. And we would always have enough visitors. They'd fill out a card and leave it behind, and we would call on them. And our main objective wasn't to get them in our church, but it was to see if they're saved, to see if they're someone that knows Jesus. And so we learned this Evangelism Explosion program, and there were two diagnostic questions that we would use. One is that if you were to die tonight, do you know for sure that you would go to heaven? Well, the answer to that question, the answer they give us tells us something. If they say no, that means that they may not be saved. And whether they say yes or no, we ask them the second question, and that is that if you were to die today and stand before God, and he were to say to you, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say to him? Well, the answer to that question is going to tell us a lot about that person. Because if someone says, well, it's because God came into my life and caused me to be born again, and he's been changing me ever since, well, that's the answer that we would expect to hear from someone that knows him. But most often, when we ask those questions to people who aren't saved, they'll point to their church membership, the fact that they believe in God, they've lived a good life, they've had more good deeds than bad deeds, and one of the things that I've noticed is that you can ask those questions, and a large percentage of the time, you won't even hear the name Jesus Christ in their answer. They won't even mention Jesus. It'll be something that they're doing. Well, I've thought of, when I was thinking about what we discussed last week, about those who claim that they've been saved, and then they have this attitude that, well, I'm just going to roll along, I'm saved, and that's all there is. I think maybe I see two diagnostic questions in 2 Chronicles 16:9 that we can bring before them. And I think we need to do it not in a condescending manner or anything like that, but that it can show them where they are, maybe. And the questions that I thought of is to mention this verse and say to people, does your heart completely belong to him? Ask them if their heart completely belongs to him. If they're saying that they were saved back in 1982 and we see no change in their life, or they have an attitude that they really don't care, I think this would be an appropriate question. Is your heart completely his? And whatever their answer might be, the second question I would say is, well, do you want your heart to be completely his? And sometimes by asking questions, we tell people much more than if we just tell them things, because their answers tell them things. So, those are my ideas. And in addition to the memory verse that we had up there, maybe now everyone has this other one. The eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the whole earth, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his.